You are watching FlashPoint, and what I'm about to show you has never happened before in the history of modern warfare. Not in the Cold War, not after 9/11, not during any conflict in the last century. On March 11, 2026, a state-linked Iranian news agency published a list of roughly 30 locations across the Middle East. Not military bases, not government ministries. A list of offices, data centers, and cloud infrastructure nodes belonging to Google, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Oracle, IBM, and Palantir. They called them in 3 words that should stop every boardroom in Silicon Valley cold. Enemy technological infrastructure. That phrase is not rhetoric, it is a strategic declaration, and the world has not fully processed what it means yet. To understand how we arrived at this moment, you need to go back exactly 12 days before that list was published. At dawn on February 28, 2026, the Israeli military and United States Armed Forces launched what analysts are already calling the most ambitious joint military operation in modern Middle Eastern history. Israel named it Operation Roaring Lion. Washington called it Operation Epic Fury. Israel deployed approximately 200 aircraft in what its military described as the largest combat sortie in its history. More than 100 munitions were used in the first 24 hours alone. American forces executed dozens of additional strikes from aircraft carriers and forward bases spread across the region. The targets were surgical and devastating: Iranian air defense systems, ballistic missile launchers, communications infrastructure, and IRGC command nodes. Within days, Iran's conventional military response capacity had been severely degraded. Its long-range missile advantage, the cornerstone of its asymmetric strategy, had been partially neutralized. Its regional proxy network, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Iraqi militias, was facing its own mounting military pressure. What Iran had left, and what no airstrike can destroy, was its cyber capability. And what happened next rewrote the rules of modern conflict. On March 10, 2026, a hacking collective called Handallah, documented by multiple cybersecurity firms as directly linked to Iranian intelligence operations, announced it had executed a successful attack against Stryker Corporation, one of the world's largest medical technology companies, headquartered in Michigan. The numbers were staggering: 50 terabytes of corporate data reportedly extracted. But the data theft was almost beside the point. What stopped security engineers around the world cold was the method. The attackers did not deploy ransomware. They did not install conventional malware. Instead, they weaponized a legitimate Microsoft corporate management tool called Microsoft Intune, a platform that enterprise IT departments use to remotely administer employee devices. Using administrative access they had quietly obtained inside Intune's management console, the attackers issued a remote wipe command. In minutes, thousands of corporate devices across Stryker's global offices, laptops, phones, desktops, including those at their Cork, Ireland headquarters, were completely erased. Employees turned to their screens and saw Handalah's logo where their corporate login page should have been. Stryker confirmed the attack publicly, describing it as a global network disruption in their Microsoft environment with no signs of ransomware or conventional malware. Read that again carefully. They used Microsoft's own tools to destroy an American company's infrastructure, not by breaking in from outside, but by operating from inside the system itself. This was not an isolated event. It was one front in a coordinated campaign. On March 1, 2026, Google's threat intelligence team published an alert documenting a coordinated cyber campaign by Iran's state-affiliated actors. Between February 28th and March 1st alone, cybersecurity firms, including Cloudflare, documented more than 150 incidents claimed by Iran-aligned hacking collectives in a 72-hour window. The distributed denial of service attacks peaked at 1.2 terabits per second, according to Cloudflare data, a volume sufficient to overwhelm the response capacity of virtually any standard corporate network on Earth. Microsoft Threat Intelligence simultaneously issued alerts about massive credential stuffing campaigns targeting regional financial institutions. Mandiant, the threat intelligence firm owned by Google, documented a 3 to 5-fold increase in Iranian origin scanning against energy assets across the Middle East. By March 2nd, 4 of the world's most important cybersecurity firms, Google, Mandiant, Cloudflare, and Microsoft, had issued coordinated alerts about the same campaign. That coordination is not routine. That is a signal. Now here is where the strategic picture becomes genuinely complex, and where FlashPoint wants to slow down and make sure you understand what is actually being communicated. The question that matters is not whether Iran can execute cyber attacks. That has been established. The question is why Iran is publicly naming Google, Microsoft, and Nvidia as targets. What strategic benefit does a public declaration produce? 3 hypotheses are circulating in specialized intelligence circles, and none of them are mutually exclusive. The first is economic deterrence. Iran is calculating that if the world's most powerful technology companies feel their regional assets are at risk, they will exert pressure on their governments and on Israel to moderate military operations. Private capital, when threatened, generates political pressure faster than almost any other force in the modern world. The second hypothesis is conflict internationalization. By explicitly drawing in multinational corporations with operations across dozens of countries, Iran is attempting to transform what Washington and Tel Aviv frame as a bilateral conflict into a global problem. A major disruption to Google or Microsoft cloud services in the region does not only affect Israel, it ripples through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, and beyond, hitting thousands of private companies and government systems that have nothing to do with this war. The third hypothesis is the most unsettling for analysts: target preparation. Publishing a list of identified locations is, in military doctrine, potentially a coded internal communication, confirming to your own operatives which assets have been mapped and prioritized without any direct signal that can be intercepted. Nvidia's specific appearance on that list demands separate attention because it reveals the deeper architecture of this conflict. Nvidia is not a gaming company anymore, not in any strategic sense that matters. In 2026, Nvidia is the computational backbone of modern artificial intelligence. Its H100 and H200 processors are the hardware substrate on which the most advanced language models run, on which real-time satellite image analysis operates, on which military targeting systems and signals intelligence platforms function. Israel and the United States use artificial intelligence in active military operations, target identification, multi-source intelligence fusion, real-time imagery analysis. These capabilities all depend at some layer on computational infrastructure, and Iran has been systematically cut off from that infrastructure. The U.S. Department of Justice in December 2025 dismantled a smuggling network that attempted to export at least $160 million in Nvidia H100 and H200 chips to restricted destinations, seizing more than $50 million in hardware. The network used shell companies, chip relabeling, and fraudulent export declarations. From Tehran's perspective, Nvidia is not a neutral commercial actor. Nvidia is the hardware they cannot buy, the capability being used against them, and therefore, by Iran's own logic, part of the conflict regardless of where its offices are located. Palantir's position on the list is perhaps the most intellectually honest placement of all. Palantir Technologies holds documented contracts with the U.S. Department of Defense, the CIA, the FBI, and multiple intelligence agencies. In Israel, it has a relationship with the Israeli military for intelligence data analytics platforms. Its core products, Palantir Gotham and Palantir AIP, are designed explicitly for intelligence fusion and military targeting operations. Unlike Google or Microsoft, whose military contracts exist alongside vast commercial operations, Palantir's central product is defense and intelligence support. Iran's decision to group Palantir with Google and Nvidia in the same list reflects a doctrine that makes no distinction between dual-use technology and purely military technology. From the Iranian strategic perspective, all technological infrastructure serving an adversary's military architecture is part of a single integrated system of power. This is geopolitically significant not just for today's conflict, but for every conflict that follows, because if other state actors adopt this doctrine as precedent, the risk calculus for every technology company with a government contract changes permanently. The deeper historical parallel that illuminates all of this sits in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War in what became known as the Tanker War. Both sides began attacking oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, not to win militarily, but to internationalize the conflict economically, forcing external powers to intervene and generating unsustainable cost pressure on the adversary. In 2026, digital infrastructure plays the role that oil tankers played then. It is the supply line of the global digital economy. Attacking it is attacking every actor that depends on it, which in today's world is essentially everyone. The cascade effects of a successful strike against a major cloud infrastructure node are nonlinear. Banking systems, hospital networks, telecommunications platforms, government services, private enterprises across multiple continents. This is the core logic of the hybrid warfare doctrine Iran has spent years developing as an asymmetric response to its adversary's conventional military superiority. The legal and ethical territory this opens up has no clear maps. When a private technology company's data centers host military intelligence services, does that infrastructure become a legitimate military target? When Palantir's analytics tools are used by an army to identify and strike targets, is Palantir a participant in hostilities? The question of when civilian contractors lose protected status under international humanitarian law has been debated for decades, but Iran has decided to answer it unilaterally, and that answer carries consequences far beyond this conflict. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity have already issued coordinated threat bulletins warning of elevated risk from Iranian-origin cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. The Presidential Policy Directive 20, America's Framework for Offensive Cyber Operations, has never been applied in the context of an active conflict at this scale. The threshold question of whether a destructive cyber attack against American private infrastructure constitutes an act of war justifying military response remains unanswered. The world is operating without a map in territory that is being charted in real time. What Iran did on March 11, 2026 is not merely a tactical threat in a regional conflict. It is the public articulation of a doctrine that states private technology companies providing capabilities to militaries and intelligence services forfeit their status as neutral civilian entities. The intellectual roots of that doctrine exist in decades of international humanitarian law debate, but Iran is the first actor to apply it explicitly and publicly to consumer-scale technology corporations with global footprints. Once that line is crossed, the question that FlashPoint believes the world should be asking, and that almost no one is asking with sufficient clarity, is this: who has the authority and the capacity to draw it back? Iran has named Google, Microsoft, and Nvidia as its next front, and no one has yet given a satisfactory answer to what happens if that threat becomes action. Sources: Tasnim News Agency, IRGC linked, March 11, 2026, target list publication. Google Threat Intelligence Group, March 1, 2026, coordinated Iranian cyber campaign alert. Cloudflare, March 2026, DDoS peak data, 1.2 Tbps. Microsoft Threat Intelligence, March 2026, credential stuffing campaign alerts. Mandiant Google, March 2026, Iranian scanning increase against energy assets. Palo Alto Networks Unit 42, March 2, 2026, Iranian cyber escalation analysis. Stryker Corporation official statement, March 2026, network disruption confirmation. U.S. Department of Justice, December 2025, Operation Gatekeeper, Nvidia chip smuggling network. CISA, U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, 2026 threat bulletins. Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, CCCS, 2026 threat bulletins. Wikipedia, Iran-U.S. nuclear negotiations, 2025, JCPOA context. Presidential Policy Directive 20, U.S. Offensive Cyber Operations Framework.